In a quiet suburban neighborhood of a small town in the United States, where old brick houses intermingle with modern mansions, lush green trees are planted closely along the roadside and winding alleys hide countless private stories of every resident. John, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor yet carrying an unwavering determination to protect his personal space, lives in a cozy little home that he has arranged according to his own aesthetic taste, where every corner holds precious memories of the past and where he finds peace amid the hectic pace of urban life. But on one gently sunlit morning, while he was meticulously rearranging old keepsake boxes in his garage, the space he regarded as the soul of his home, a repository of past images and unfulfilled dreams, he suddenly halted in surprise and astonishment when he discovered a luxurious, sleek black car with an elegant design and sophisticated appearance parked right in the middle of his garage, as if it had just usurped his ownership, an act he considered a profound violation of the personal space he had so painstakingly nurtured. In that moment, John's emotions were overwhelmed by a tumultuous blend of anger, confusion, and an indescribable sorrow, as if each beat of his heart echoed not only a physical violation but also an intrusion into his very soul, his sanctuary of cherished values like privacy and personal freedom. Confronted by this scene, the sound of the car reverberated quietly through every corner of the garage, awakening in John memories of the times he had vowed never to let anyone, no matter how insignificant, invade the space he had built with such care. And at that very moment, from a distance came the sharp, cutting voice of Karen, the middle-aged woman famous throughout the neighborhood for her quintessential Karen demeanor, always insisting on her own righteousness and unafraid to impose her opinions on others, calling out, "Oh, what an unbelievable moment, John, you must be surprised, right?" A voice that was not merely a mocking greeting but also as if a sharp knife slicing through the peaceful morning atmosphere, making John feel as though every bit of his personal space was being gradually eroded. In that instant, he recalled the many times Karen had merely passed by with just a nod, yet her confidently disdainful smile always betrayed her belief that her authority transcended all common rules, and now, her act of parking, whether by accident or on purpose, had become a symbol of contempt for the privacy and respect he had so dearly cherished. With a storm of conflicting emotions surging within him, John stepped out of the garage, his eyes fixed intently on Karen, while an indescribable tempest of feelings rose inside him as he struggled to maintain a calm exterior even though his inner thoughts roared. How can it be that at a moment when I only dare to dream of an orderly private space, it is now being shattered by such a thoughtless act? Unspoken questions echoing relentlessly in his mind, making him feel as if not only a small part of his home was being invaded, but his very essence, honed through countless drops of sweat, tears, and the effort to build a life of order, was being challenged by the prejudices and arrogant attitudes of others. As he crossed the threshold of the garage, John sought an explanation in Karen's eyes, but instead of receiving remorse or a gentle apology, he only encountered the cold, arrogant gaze of a woman who always considered herself the center of the universe, as if her action were nothing more than an assertion of personal power. "Karen, perhaps you should move your car outside so as not to disturb other people's privacy," he said in a deep, soft yet resolute voice, as if attempting to construct a protective barrier with his words between his heart and the unwanted conflict. Yet his words only elicited a scornful laugh from Karen, who replied in a sarcastic tone, "Oh, John, I think you believe you have the right to choose the best parking spot, don't you? I just want to show everyone that I, too, have a place in this neighborhood." Her words ringing out like a bell that signaled her disdain for the values John had so painstakingly built and further filling his mind with a sense of helplessness, as if he were witnessing not only an invasion of his garage but also an intrusion into his very being. As the morning light gradually seeped through the window frame of the garage, John's thoughts grew even more tangled, and he recalled long nights spent awake by the window listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in his house, each sound evoking memories of the times he had vowed to uphold freedom and privacy, the very values he considered the core of his identity. Yet now, everything seemed threatened by an absurd intrusion, and his anger was not merely an immediate reaction but had seeped into every fiber of his memory, reminding him of past instances of petty injustice that had left deep scars in his heart and causing him to wonder whether this world was ever truly just or merely a series of endless conflicts. Nevertheless, John strove to quell the anger within him, telling himself that impulsive actions would only worsen the situation and that he needed time to reflect and find a solution that would protect his rights without further damaging the long-standing relationships within his community. After a brief exchange with Karen, John returned inside his home, his heart laden with worry and contemplation, wondering whether Karen's act was merely an impulsive outburst or a sign of the arrogant, self-important attitude she habitually carried not only toward him but toward everyone around her. And in the cozy living room, where natural light gently filtered through the curtains and reflected off family photos adorning the walls, John sat at an old wooden table where he had once shared meaningful conversations with his late father about life's simple yet significant truths. And from this, he sensed that every human action carried a part of the past, an immutable essence that time could not erase, which only deepened his contemplation about the true meaning of privacy, self-determination, and mutual respect in a community that had bonded together for generations. Though his mind was in turmoil, he resolved not to let his emotions cloud his judgment, for he knew he must confront reality and find a resolution to this predicament, as his living space was not only a repository of material possessions but also a sanctuary for his soul and his belief in a meaningful life. As dusk descended, painting the sky in shades of red-orange tinged with melancholy, John ventured outside to stroll through the neighborhood, hoping that the cool air might bring some peace to his troubled soul. And along the way he encountered several friendly neighbors who, having also noticed the unusual events of the morning, offered him gentle nods instead of gossip or judgment, as if they too understood the discomfort of having one's private space violated, even though each expressed it in their own way. And in a rare moment, John felt that despite the conflicts and disputes, this community could still rely on each other to share and empathize. Yet it was precisely this empathy that made him realize that to protect himself, he needed to draw a clear line between the individual and the collective, between his core values and external pressures. Later, as night fell and the atmosphere grew quiet with only the soft whisper of the wind heard throughout the street, John sat by the living room window, gazing at the dim lights of the neighborhood and listening to the silent sounds of the night, as if every noise were narrating a tale of loneliness, complex relationships, and fragile hopes for a brighter tomorrow. And in that moment he reminded himself that although he had to face Karen's unforeseen intrusion that day, it was but a small chapter in his life, a challenge to learn to protect and cherish his values even more. And his heart surged with a tumultuous mix of anger, disappointment, and unyielding determination in the face of any pressure, as if that inner struggle painted a vivid portrait of a person who continually fought to maintain his faith in himself. And under the pale moonlight with the soothing murmur of the wind that night, John resolved that no matter how rife with injustice the world around him might be or how impulsive actions like Karen's might occur, he would steadfastly uphold his convictions and protect his personal space, not only for himself but also for the spiritual values he had nurtured over the years, for that protection was the key to living true to his identity and to moving toward a tomorrow where mutual respect would form the foundation of every relationship, whether in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the United States or elsewhere. While the early morning light hesitantly filtered through the rows of trees along the roadside, after the tense incident that had occurred in the garage that morning, John still stood there, feeling each heartbeat as if it echoed both painful memories and fragile hopes. And immediately he knew that he could not let the situation pass silently, for every moment of lost control not only diminished the value of his personal space but also eroded his deep faith in mutual respect within the community. And with his mind weighed down by a storm of chaotic thoughts, John stepped out of the living room, his breath still tinged with the bitterness of injustice, determined to approach the garage where Karen was standing, her face still exuding an air of cold arrogance as if she were oblivious to any emotional harm her actions had caused. And in that moment the atmosphere between them exploded into a fierce wave of emotion, causing everything around to pause in tense silence. "Karen, could you explain to me why you parked your car here, in the space that I have painstakingly cultivated with my own cherished memories and heartfelt dedication?" The words were spoken with a calm yet seething tone of anger and disappointment, causing Karen merely to smirk disdainfully and reply in a haughty tone without any remorse. "John, I think you should learn to see life more broadly, for my parking spot is not your concern but rather a way for me to express my freedom and my status in this neighborhood." Words that, like sharp blades, not only intensified the frustration in John's heart, but also ignited the flames of an inevitable confrontation. For from those very first words he had sensed the coldness and lack of respect towards the space he considered his spiritual sanctuary, the very space he had devoted years of labor and sacrifice to cherish. At that moment, right outside the garage door, the curious gazes of the neighbors gradually turned toward them, as if they could not tear their eyes away from the unfolding scene, and murmurs and hushed gossip slowly spread, contributing to an increasingly oppressive atmosphere, as though the entire neighborhood were witnessing a small yet haunting tragedy of violated values. In John's mind, memories of times when he had been hurt, of times when he felt betrayed by those he trusted, surged like an underground current, making it impossible for him to contain his anger. And even though he knew that a public argument would only further damage the already fragile relationships of the community, he could not quell the swelling outrage, for each word from Karen only reminded him of old wounds, fragments of trust and self-respect that he had painstakingly shed piece by piece in order to build a secure, independent life. If you think that parking here is merely an innocuous act, then you are mistaken, because every space you intrude upon is not only a parking spot but also holds a soul, the precious memories I have stored over the years, and I will not allow anyone, not even you, to harm those values, John declared, his voice resonating in the stifling confines of the garage, like a final challenge delivered to Karen's cold heart, causing the surrounding atmosphere to grow heavier than ever. Although Karen recognized that John's words carried sincerity and deep pain, true to her haughty nature, she merely smirked and said, "John, I don't think you'll ever understand how the world works. I simply follow my own rules, and if you cannot accept that, perhaps you should learn to adapt instead of clinging to outdated values." Words that not only deepened the impasse in their exchange but also felt like needles pricking through layers of emotion, making John feel as though everything he had cherished was being destroyed by the indifference and arrogance of his counterpart. In that tense moment, when their voices seemed to construct an invisible wall that blocked any possibility of empathy, John felt there was no room left for negotiation or compromise, and in his mind his decision had solidified like the indelible scars of the past. A decision that, to protect his spiritual space, he had to put an end to any form of intrusion, even if only temporarily. And then, with trembling yet determined hands, John returned inside, opened the key cabinet, and slowly turned the key to securely lock the garage door. A simple act imbued with profound meaning as an uncompromising declaration to anyone who dared encroach upon his personal space. And immediately, that decision struck like a shockwave that shook the entire community, as rumors about John's action quickly spread through every alley and house, leaving the neighbors both puzzled and even suspicious about the deep-rooted reasons behind such an extreme decision. Overwhelmed by a torrent of emotions, John felt not only anger and hurt, but also loneliness and a loss of faith in shared values. And he realized that sometimes, to protect himself, he must temporarily leave the very land he once considered home, even if it might harm the already fragile relationships. In that decisive moment of departure, as he prepared to close the door after one final lock, his heart surged with a mixture of emptiness and relief, as if every key and every door closed marked a turning point, opening a new journey for his soul. A journey to rediscover himself, to heal emotional wounds, and to move toward a tomorrow that might carry a glimmer of hope. Outside, the murmurs of the neighbors grew increasingly lively, but to John those voices were merely faint echoes that could not shake the decision he had long made. And he understood that no matter how many murmurs, objections, or scrutinizing eyes there were, personal freedom and the protection of one's private space were matters beyond dispute. Before leaving the house, John stood silently by the window, gazing at the scenery outside, the rows of trees, the houses, and the small neighborhood that had once given him a sense of safety, but now all seemed haunted by a storm of endless conflicts and strife. And in that moment he told himself that a period of separation, even if just for a week, would give him the opportunity to reflect, to heal, and to rediscover himself, as well as to prove that silence is not always synonymous with acceptance but sometimes is the voice of self-respect. When John finally stepped out of the house, carrying with him a myriad of emotions and unwavering determination, he felt each step on the cold cobblestone path like the beating of a distressed heart, while the neighbors, even those merely indirect witnesses, were astonished by his strange resolve and Karen, though still maintaining her usual haughty appearance, had a glimmer of unease in her eyes, as if she realized that John's action was not merely retaliation but also a warning to an entire community accustomed to petty conflicts. In John's mind, the intermingling of anger, sorrow, and profound loneliness had woven a rich inner tapestry, where every tear and sigh testified to a heart that had endured too much pain yet never abandoned its yearning to reclaim freedom and peace. Thus, even though he knew that the coming days would pass in the absence of his presence, John believed that this distance would grant him the time to reflect on the values that had once sustained him through storms. And even though Karen's voice still echoed in his mind like a harsh reminder of disrespect, it was his silence and decision to leave that proved to be the best way to restore the lost balance, regain inner strength, and prepare himself to face future challenges, even though his heart still harbored a trace of uncertainty, nostalgia for the past, and fear of an unpredictable future. Through the final moments of that afternoon, as the sunset gradually descended, dyeing the sky with hues of red-orange tinged with melancholy, John gently walked along the predetermined path, carrying with him the determination to protect what remained of himself, and in his soul, no matter how much pain and loss there had been, he remained resilient, as if the act of locking the garage door was not only an expression of instantaneous anger but also a promise never to forsake his own values. A bold declaration that regardless of how the world might change or how conflicts might escalate, self-respect and the desire to live true to one's own identity would forever be an undying flame in every heart. And so, as John turned his back on the familiar house, the sound of the securely locked garage door echoed with each of his steps like a bittersweet yet determined farewell song, opening a new chapter. A chapter in which inner wounds would be healed over time, lessons from the past would become the impetus to build a stronger future, and no matter how many murmurs or scrutinizing glances from the community there were, no one could ever truly understand the depth of his decision, for it was he, with all his self-respect and efforts to protect his private space, who had chosen the path to freedom and a steadfast belief in his own worth. From the moment John left and securely locked the garage door, a heavy void enveloped not only his house but also the once peaceful little neighborhood known for its privacy and close-knit bonds, and immediately Karen, with her naturally confident and arrogant demeanor and icy eyes as if she fully understood her own power, swiftly took over the garage space, not merely by standing there to mock John's painful memories, but also by gradually intruding into the inner areas of the house through changing the locks and hanging self-made signs bearing vague yet scathing messages, which transformed the formerly serene atmosphere into a chaotic mess laden with tension and unease, as every minute detail of the house seemed to be marked by the presence of a dark past intertwined with a contradictory present. Meanwhile, the neighbors, once accustomed to warm and friendly chats, were suddenly shocked by this change, and whispers and murmurs intermingled with worried glances gradually spread throughout the street, as Bill, a middle-aged man sensitive about privacy, could not hide his discontent when he confided to another neighbor, "We are witnessing something unbelievable," as if Karen is deliberately reviving John's old wounds to turn them into a symbol of injustice. And those words only deepened the somber mood of the entire community, especially as, amid the ensuing chaos, the sound of police sirens echoed from afar, signaling that a security system that rarely needed to intervene in trivial matters was now confronted with a situation spiraling out of control. Furthermore, in a shadowy corner of the neighborhood, an uninvited mysterious man with a solemn demeanor and deep, sorrowful eyes, as if bearing the weight of a past tragedy, appeared, drawing every gaze as if his presence were a reminder that no one can ever truly escape a dark past. And through the harsh whispers of the elderly residents, the scandalous story surrounding Karen gradually emerged when one neighbor remarked, "I have heard that not only is Karen inherently arrogant, but she was also once involved in a case of exploiting her power to manipulate the assets of the vulnerable," which shattered the image of Karen, previously cloaked in a veneer of confidence, revealing dark stains from her past. At the same time, while Karen was diligently consolidating her power through each cunning act, an unexpected event occurred when a truck lost control and barreled into the neighborhood, triggering a series of minor collisions accompanied by roaring engine sounds and terrified screams from the residents, plunging the entire community into complete chaos and intensifying the already tense atmosphere, as if fate itself were punishing everyone for long-standing injustices and conflicts. And at that very moment, As the screams merged with the blare of police sirens and the rumble of the truck echoed throughout the area, Karen, though still striving to maintain her cold exterior, could not help but feel a profound inner tremor, as if the painful memories of the past were rushing back, causing her to suddenly realize that, although everything seemed to be going her way, the dark past she had tried to bury for so many years was gradually being exposed in the light of truth. And at that moment, a trembling voice from a young neighbor, full of sincerity and sorrow, rang out amidst the crowd, saying, "Karen, perhaps you should rethink everything, because every action you take not only hurts you but also affects the entire community." Words that seeped into Karen's mind and momentarily stripped her of her usual confidence to reveal a hint of fear, while the surrounding residents, fully aware that their living space was being threatened by an unforeseen force, grew even more anxious and troubled as they watched the police continue their efforts to restore order, and the eyes of the neighbors, though trying to conceal their fear, could not hide their unease, as if they wondered whether this chaos would ever end or was merely a sign of greater upheavals looming ahead. And in the midst of all this, as the atmosphere grew even more suffocating with tension, a small fire suddenly broke out in the adjacent house, rapidly spreading across walls and roofs to create a scene of utter disorder as people hurriedly gathered, with screams, alarm sirens, and the clatter of falling bricks resounding, each moment seeming to ignite a deep-seated fear within every heart. And, at that moment, Karen, standing amid the chaos in which she had just asserted control over her space, suddenly realized that her own actions had unleashed an uncontrollable storm, as her gaze gradually shifted from arrogance to bewilderment and a surge of conflicting emotions. Remorse, fear, and profound loneliness overwhelmed her, as if every cold gust of that night carried the indictments of her past, forcing her to confront a harsh reality she had long tried to deny. And in that moment, amid the clamor of the crowd, the voices of the police, and the incessant whispers of the neighbors, it seemed as though the entire neighborhood was collectively questioning and worrying, as if seeking an escape from a reality rife with contradictions and pain, while Karen, even as she attempted to maintain her cold demeanor, could no longer hide the tremors in her soul, and for a brief moment, as the dim light of the street lamps gradually replaced the daylight, she could only murmur to herself, "Perhaps, no matter how hard I try, the past will never let go, and my actions have awakened a storm that I cannot control." As if that self-admonition was not only the voice of a soul enduring pain but also a warning to herself. And outside, as the police sirens and the crowd's screams merged into a symphony of chaos and suffering, the fragments of truth were gradually laid bare, causing everyone to realize that after this storm of events, not only had a physical space been violated but also, the souls that once trusted in safety and order were now forced to face the harsh reality of the truth. And in that anxiety, each heartbeat seemed to echo the collective sigh of an entire community, where every action and every word could become a fragment of a tragic story about loss, unending pain, and the longing to rediscover oneself in a world that appeared to have lost its inherent balance. And thus, in that dark, foggy night, when everything seemed to set aside ordinary life, Karen stood there in the faint glow of the streetlights, her eyes shimmering with inexplicable tears, as if she realized that although she had once been proud of her power and personal freedom, now, in every moment of chaos, her dark past and inner conflicts had reached the very core of her heart, forcing her to confront herself. And in the silence of the late night, as every sigh of the people rose like a prayer for a brighter tomorrow, the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of whether, after this storm of events, there would still be room for the beliefs, honesty, and humanity they once regarded as the foundation of life, or if all that remained were merely fragments of the past, of secrets and unhealed pain, until, in the final moments of the chaos, when everyone gradually began to depart, leaving behind only the echo of whispered words, Karen, whose soul suddenly realized that everything, no matter how much it might be concealed by a veneer of arrogance, ultimately cannot escape the light of truth, stood there, facing herself and a community that had witnessed it all, as if every step she had taken up to that point had led to an irrevocable crossroads. And in the silence following the storm, when only sighs and longing for what was lost remained, the entire neighborhood resembled a mournful melody questioning whether the inner wounds could ever truly heal, whether a new day might ever erase those dark fragments of memory. And in that pervasive unease, it seemed that everyone, From the neighbors to the police, even to the lost souls of the past, shared a common pain, a yearning to live in peace and freedom regardless of how much things might change, regardless of how the storm of events had swept away everything built with passion and faith. And so, in that cold and gloomy night, Karen, despite all her inherent stubbornness and arrogance, was left with nothing but the fragments of her very self. And then, under the dim moonlight and the howling, whined through every narrow alley of the neighborhood, the story of the invasion of space, of invisible conflicts, and of dark secrets gradually became an inseparable part of history, of the people who once lived, loved, and suffered in a world where truth always finds a way to reveal itself, even if through deep cuts in each person's soul. And that is the story of a community in which every moment carries its own sorrows, wounds that never fully heal, yet through which they gradually learn to rise, to confront the past, and to look toward a future in which, no matter how dark it may be, there will always be a glimmer of hope, as if promising that no matter how many conflicts and pains there are, people can still find themselves in every moment. And that story, despite containing so much pain and chaos, ultimately stands as a testament to life, to the unyielding desire never to give up, and to the belief that after the storm of events, the community will regain the lost balance and open a new chapter of hope and faith in a brighter tomorrow. After a long week spent in the quiet of repressed thoughts and tangled memories of what had passed, as the atmosphere in the once peaceful little neighborhood gradually became enveloped by signs of upheaval and emotions rising to a suffocating crescendo, John, the man who had once defended his private space with all his heart and soul, returned now with a mind heavy with memories, anger, and deep sorrow intermingled with the fragile hope of a new beginning, opening the garage door with trembling, yet resolute hands, and immediately before him appeared Karen, the woman once known for her self-satisfied demeanor and disdainful attitude, now standing there with eyes that blended coldness and apprehension, as if within her the pressures of an unyielding past were silently shattering her. And in that moment of transition between the weak light of the sunset and the gradually encroaching darkness, John's footsteps resonated like the affirmation of a soul that had endured countless wounds yet now decided no longer to accept intrusion, as he spoke in a voice echoing with deep contemplation and determination. Karen, can you tell me why you did this, causing not only my personal space but this entire community to suffer the heavy consequences of your actions? Words that sliced through the air like sharp blades and awakened old memories. When Karen initially replied in a tone of sarcasm and self-importance, John, I only did what I believed was right. I merely wanted to assert my autonomy. And if you cannot accept that, perhaps you should learn to change your perspective. But immediately thereafter, as if a hint of fear and hesitation suddenly appeared in her eyes, a soft whisper from a nearby neighbor was heard. Karen, perhaps you should speak honestly, for what you did not only infringed upon personal space but also concealed secrets from the past, scars you once tried to hide, making the atmosphere heavier than ever. And at that moment Karen's gaze gradually shifted from self-satisfaction to confusion, as if every word of John's was opening old doors she had once sealed, forcing her to confront old pains she believed were forgotten. And in that moment John moved closer to Karen, his approach not only an expression of resolve but also an invitation to mend unhealed wounds, as he said, Karen, perhaps we are all burdened by our own pasts, and every action, every word carries unforeseen consequences. Not only for me but for this entire community where each person once lived together with trust and respect. And those words were like gentle rays of light piercing through the dense night of wounded souls, causing everyone present, from the neighbors to the police, to gradually fall silent, listening to every word as if awaiting liberation for the fragments of the past. And in that moment Karen, with a trembling yet regretful voice, finally admitted, John, I'm sorry, I did everything because I felt threatened by a dark force, because my past once made me lose what was precious, and I did not know how to protect myself. A confession that swept through the minds of all like a cold wind and subdued the surrounding atmosphere. And immediately an unexpected twist occurred in John's mind when he realized that what Karen had just said was not merely an apology but also an acknowledgement of a past filled with secrets and dark connections in which he too had once been entangled, leaving his heart torn between personal pain and conflicting empathy. And in that moment, as John's gaze gradually softened, he continued in a voice no longer filled with anger but now gentle and warm, perhaps, even though what has happened could shatter everything, we still have a chance to rediscover ourselves, to heal old wounds and look toward a future where forgiveness and compassion can triumph. Words that shone like gentle beams in the night, opening the door to healing, causing Karen, with regretful eyes and a few silent tears, to seemingly realize that although the past may never completely vanish, it is only by confronting and accepting our mistakes that we can truly attain freedom. And as the surrounding space suddenly fell silent with only the sighing of the wind and the heavy, emotional gazes of the people remaining, John and Karen stood facing each other in a suffocating silence yet filled with hope as the moon began to emerge after the rain, shining upon the indelible scars of time as a reminder that even though everything may fade with time, the lessons of courage, forgiveness, and the longing to live true to one's genuine self will forever be an undying flame. And in that moment of communion, as John gently nodded with eyes reflecting the acceptance of a soul that had endured so much pain, he said, "Karen, although many things remain unexplained, at least we have been able to look each other in the eye and recognize that within each person lie wounds, and only when we dare to confront them, dare to apologize and forgive, can we continue on the path to rediscovering ourselves." And as his voice continued to resonate, Karen replied in a warm yet wistful tone, "John, I understand that what I have done cannot be completely atoned for, but I promise that from now on, I will try to face myself, try to heal my old wounds, and not let the past determine my path any longer." Words that were like small seeds planted in an atmosphere heavy with regret, promising a new beginning, a new chapter for both, but also serving as a reminder that no matter how much effort is made to heal, the past will always leave an indelible mark. And as the police gradually withdrew and people began to return to their daily lives, though still filled with uncertainty, John and Karen stood there, no longer as adversaries but as individuals who once carried their own pasts and now faced reality together. And in the final moments of the day, as the light gradually faded and darkness prevailed, they stepped out of the house together, not as enemies but as friends, two souls seeking forgiveness and hope. And although their story may never be encapsulated in a perfect ending, those moments imparted a profound lesson to the entire community about the boundary between self-protection and acceptance of life's conflicts, about the cost of extreme actions and the power of compassion. And thus, under the starry sky of the late night, as everything seemed to fall silent in the harmony between past and present, between pain and forgiveness, the entire community, from neighbors to lost souls, awaited a tomorrow where the light of truth and humanity would always guide them, opening a new beginning for every heart no matter how many trials occur. And the story of John and Karen, with all its conflicts, tears, and hope, will forever bear witness that although people may stumble due to the mistakes of the past, it is only through the courage to confront and the compassion that we can overcome every challenge to rediscover ourselves in an ever-changing world.